It wasn't the kind of night that screamed, history in the making. No red carpet, no political rally energy. Just rows of fold-out chairs, stage lighting a little too bright, and a podium set dead center inside the Gerald Ford Civic Center in Grand Rapids, Michigan. But something about the air in that auditorium, it didn't feel ordinary. It was heavy, but not with tension. It was something else. Like everyone knew something unscripted was coming, but no one knew from where. The event? A nationally televised town hall called Voices of Tomorrow. It was supposed to be a bridge Gen Z on one side, Washington on the other. A night of questions, answers, and maybe a few headline moments for the cameras. Nothing too wild, just another panel show with a little more youth and a little less control. Except control doesn't always go as planned. Representative Jasmine Crockett sat third from the left on stage, former public defender, now a member of Congress. She didn't fidget, didn't smile for the cameras. She just watched, laser-focused, like she'd been through enough to know when someone was posturing versus when they were about to speak truth. Then came Barron Trump, 18 years old, recently graduated, not a politician, but the name alone, that name carried weight, whether anyone liked it or not. He walked toward the mic with a quiet confidence, shoulders back, chin slightly raised. His team had prepped him for this moment, no doubt. He wasn't here to stumble, he was here to make a point. And every camera in the room turned slightly, just enough to catch the moment. Not because he was famous, because he looked like he knew exactly what he was about to say. Behind the scenes, producers leaned forward. This was the kind of tension you don't script, it just arrives. And as Barron took a deep breath and leaned toward the microphone, even the moderator sat back in his chair. This wasn't on the cue card. Something was about to go off script. And every single person in that room knew it. The moment Barron Trump opened his mouth, the room didn't gasp, it stilled. It was the kind of pause that didn't come from shock, but from awareness. Everyone could feel the line being crossed. They just didn't know what side of it he'd land on. He stepped up to the mic with the calmness of someone who'd practiced in front of mirrors and handlers. The lights didn't shake him. The audience didn't faze him. And as he cleared his throat, his eyes locked straight on Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, voice steady, lips curled into a subtle smirk. "I've followed some of your past legal cases and your public commentary. It's hard to take certain people seriously when they use outrage as a career move." He said it smoothly, confidently, like a line designed to hit hard but still sound like a question. But it wasn't a question. And it didn't hit the way he thought it would. There was no audible gasp, no sudden reaction from the crowd. Just that silence, that pregnant pause, when a room collectively decides to stop blinking. All eyes turned to Crockett. She didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't even shift in her seat. She simply looked at him, tilted her head, just slightly, like someone hearing something familiar, but spoken in a different voice. It wasn't the first time she'd been challenged, not the first time someone mistook calmness for weakness, and definitely not the first time someone young and bold mistook confidence for truth. But what Barron didn't realize, at least not yet, was that this wasn't a moment to score points. This was a moment that would be replayed, dissected, and remembered. He'd come in thinking this was his stage, that a bold statement and a well-placed critique would spark a round of applause, or, at the very least, a viral clip. He wasn't wrong about the clip, just wrong about how it would play out. Across the stage, Crockett leaned in ever so slightly. Her eyes never left his. Her hands remained still. No microphone adjustment, no grand body language. Just that stare. And then, finally, she spoke. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice even, almost gentle. "It's telling that the loudest voices criticizing my tone rarely have anything to say about the facts that made that tone necessary." That was it. One sentence. Low volume, high impact. The ripple began first in the front rows, then in the back. Not applause, not whispers. Just a shift. Like the room had realized something Barron hadn't yet. He'd walked into a conversation with a script. She'd walked in with lived experience. And now, The real story was just beginning. Barron Trump wasn't used to silence feeling this loud. His line had landed, at least. That's what his team would have told him to believe. It was polished, sharp, the kind of sentence meant to stir online debates and cue quick-hit reaction clips. But Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett hadn't taken the bait. She didn't fire back. She didn't flinch. Instead, she held the moment like a surgeon holds a scalpel steady, precise, unshaken. Barron had tried to shake the room. She, on the other hand, held it still. Crockett's eyes were fixed on him, not with anger or contempt, but with something worse clarity. The kind that made bravado feel like plastic. The kind that didn't need volume to leave a mark. She sat forward, voice unwavering. "You call it outrage," she said slowly. "I call it survival." And just like that, the air changed. She didn't raise her voice, but her words cut through the air with a force that didn't require theatrics. She didn't come to perform. She came to clarify. She spoke of the courtroom of the girls she defended who didn't have PR teams, famous fathers, or followers. Girls who cried when their voices were mocked, their pain dismissed. Girls labeled loud just for trying to be heard. There was a case she brought up, a 12-year-old suspended for talking back to a teacher. But later, the same teacher was caught mocking the student's dialect on a hot mic. It wasn't a punchline. It was a pattern. Barron shifted. This wasn't what he rehearsed for. Crockett wasn't attacking him. She was unpacking something he'd never carried. Outrage, she repeated, was never a strategy. It was the only language left when nobody cared to listen. Barron tried to jump back and tried to say, "I'm just saying," but Crockett gently cut him off. "No," she said. "You're not just saying, you're performing. And unfortunately for you, I don't hand out standing ovations for weak scripts." Still no yelling. Still no theatrics. Just a razor of truth dressed in restraint. Barron's jaw tensed. His eyes darted not just toward Crockett now, but toward the audience, the moderator, even the cameras. But none of them were going to rescue him. Not tonight. Because this wasn't about embarrassment. This wasn't about dominance. It was about reality hitting a little too calmly for comfort. And Jasmine Crockett? She never once raised her voice. Because when you've fought real battles, silence becomes its own kind of armor. Barron Trump stood there, shoulders still squared, but something had shifted. The edges of his performance were starting to fray. His lines were memorized, his posture trained, but the stage wasn't bending to his confidence. Not this time. Jasmine Crockett didn't just deflect his critique. She dismantled it quietly, methodically, like someone who'd heard the same argument 100 times before, just never delivered quite this earnestly. The truth is, Barron didn't come to ask a question. He came to make a moment. And on paper, it should have worked. The cameras were rolling. The format was loose. He was the unexpected element, the youthful wild card among seasoned lawmakers. His father's legacy still echoed in every room he entered. And in some spaces, that was enough to clear a path. But this room didn't clear. This room waited. And Crockett, unshaken, gave no ground. Across the stage, she didn't change her volume, didn't roll her eyes, didn't scoff. She just spoke from a place Barron hadn't yet been. "The problem with speaking before you've lived," she said, "is that you confuse volume with vision." The crowd didn't cheer. They leaned in. Barron opened his mouth maybe to push back, maybe to recover, but Crockett kept going. "When I was practicing law," she said, "I sat in courtrooms where young black girls were called aggressive for crying after being assaulted." Barron blinked. "I watched silence used as a weapon. I watched tone used as a cage." He swallowed hard. Because this wasn't an argument, it was testimony. She continued, "You've lived in a world that gives you the benefit of the doubt before you even speak. Most of the people I fight for don't even get the benefit of being heard." He didn't respond. He couldn't. Because for the first time, this wasn't about his point, it was about his perspective. "You call it outrage," she said, eyes still fixed on him. "But what you really mean is, you're making me uncomfortable by refusing to shrink, and I'm not shrinking." Someone in the crowd murmured a low, audible, not dramatic, just real. Barron didn't move. His hand, which had been resting lightly on the podium, curled just slightly at the edge. A grip, not of defiance, but of realization. His prepared lines didn't fit this moment. His certainty didn't protect him from her clarity. Because what Jasmine Crockett brought to that stage wasn't a mic drop. It was lived memory. It was courtroom scars. It was the type of truth that doesn't need a soundbite to survive. And Barron? He wasn't debating anymore. He was learning in real time the cost of showing up with polish instead of purpose. Barron Trump wasn't used to being this quiet. He wasn't frozen just. Still. The kind of stillness that only shows up when your blueprint falls apart mid-sentence. When the performance you prepared meets a reality you didn't plan for. Jasmine Crockett didn't let the silence go to waste. She stepped further into the moment, not to gloat, but to teach. "You care about tone," she said, voice calm, unwavering. "Because you've never had to fight for the right to speak." She wasn't angry. She wasn't sharp. She was anchored. "Tone," she continued, "didn't get me through law school while I worked night shifts. Tone didn't sit beside grieving mothers after a traffic stop turned fatal. And it sure didn't protect teenage girls from being accused of acting grown just because they wore lip gloss to school." Barron's lips parted slightly, but he didn't speak. She wasn't trying to embarrass him. That wasn't her goal. Her words weren't aimed to cut. They were aimed to reveal. And what they revealed was uncomfortable. For him. For the audience. Even for the producers backstage who'd thought they were scripting a fiery youth versus establishment segment. Instead, they were witnessing something raw, something real. Crockett's hands moved gently just enough to underscore her rhythm. One rested flat on the table, the other traced the air softly, like a conductor guiding emotion instead of music. "Tone," she said again, letting the words sit in the air, "is a tool people reach for when they want to avoid substance, when they want to critique without confronting." Then she looked straight at Barron. "I'm not here to sound nice. I'm here to tell the truth." And she meant every syllable. Barron didn't interrupt. Whether it was respect, discomfort, or the weight of her word, she stayed quiet. But this wasn't about dominance. It wasn't about who was louder or quicker or cleverer. It was about who had walked through fire and who hadn't yet been burned. Then she turned from him, not to dismiss him, but to expand the conversation. "To everyone in this room," she said, her gaze now sweeping the auditorium, "we invite young voices to these tables, but only if they're agreeable, palatable, easy to package." Heads began to nod, quiet ones, nervous ones. "I want young people to challenge me," she said, her voice unwavering. "But don't come at me with pre-written punches and expect me to flinch. You don't walk into the ring thinking your last name will do the fighting for you." Barron blinked. Once, twice. He wasn't the villain here. But in this moment, he wasn't the protagonist either. He was something more fragile, more honest. A young man confronting the limits of his script, and the beginning of something far more real. You could feel it, something had changed. The air in the room wasn't tense anymore. It wasn't even quiet in that dramatic, television-ready way. It was something else entirely. It was focused. Barron Trump had entered the auditorium with a message, with confidence, with a posture rehearsed a dozen times over. He was ready to land a punch, walk away with the clip, and let the headlines do the rest. But Jasmine Crockett didn't come to play that game. And now, the crowd wasn't looking at Barron like a disruptor. They were watching him, like a student, still standing, still dignified, but learning in real time that the ground under him wasn't what he thought. Crockett leaned forward slightly, not in challenge, but in clarity. "I've buried friends because of failed systems," she said quietly. "You've been featured in magazines for being tall. No laughter, no booze, just a stillness so deep, even the camera crew stopped moving." And the other voice never rose. Her tone remained that same measured cadence she had kept since the first word. Every sentence landed not with volume, but with weight. That's when Barron's shoulders eased, not slouched, but no longer squared like armor. He was listening, and that alone on that stage, in front of that audience, was newsworthy. Because, in today's world, it's rare to see someone hold their ego in check, especially when the cameras are rolling. But Jasmine wasn't finished. "You want to lead?" she asked, locking eyes again. Then ask better questions. Not the kind that get you retweets, the kind that keep you up at night. You could hear someone exhale in the second row, not because it was profound, but because it was honest. She turned back to the audience, widening her message. Don't show up to impress. Show up to learn. Bring something real, not rehearsed. Barron looked down for a moment, just briefly. Not in defeat. In reflection. And for the first time that night, he looked less like a challenger and more like a young man, willing to sit in the discomfort of what he didn't know. That was the moment people would talk about later. Not the zinger, not the viral clip, but the stillness, the humility, the quiet realization that maybe, just maybe, being right isn't as powerful as being open. And Jasmine, she didn't gloat. She didn't ride the momentum. She just folded her hands, waited for the moderator, and let the silence do the rest. Because when you've lived the battles she has, you don't need to win a moment. You just need to tell the truth and trust it to land. The segment ended quietly. No music, no dramatic applause, just a few shuffles of paper, a polite thank you from the moderator, and the usual fade to black. But outside the walls of that civic center, the real story had only just begun. Within the hour, the internet lit up not with outrage, not with spin, but with curiosity. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's response were already bouncing across TikTok, Twitter, YouTube. But it wasn't the flashy lines people shared the most. It was the pauses. The look on Barron's face when she said, "You confuse volume with vision." The way he blinked, stunned, not angry, not embarrassed, just processing. It wasn't just political junkies tuning in this time. It was teachers, teenagers, parents on lunch break, people scrolling through their feeds who suddenly stopped because something felt different. And then Barron posted a video. No background music, no filters, just his face lit by a hallway light. He held his phone up and spoke into it softly. "Last night I tried to make a point," he said, "and got taught a better one." That was it. No spin, no bravado, no damage control. Just a young man owning the fact that he had shown up ready to whine and left realizing he still had more to learn. And people noticed. Comment sections, usually full of sarcasm and division, started filling with something else, respect. Not for what he said, but for how he handled what was said to him. Didn't expect that maturity. Honestly, I disagree with both of them politically, but this was real. He didn't run. He stayed. That matters. Even some of Crockett's usual critics paused to acknowledge the moment. Because what they witnessed wasn't a takedown, it was transformation. And Crockett? She didn't post a victory lap. She didn't repost Barron's clip or make the rounds on late-night shows. She released one quiet statement the next morning. Public spaces work best when people enter them ready to listen. That includes all of us. Behind the scenes, staffers from both sides had already begun exchanging emails. Not about press tours or damage control. About something bigger. A second conversation. This time off camera. Talks about maybe setting up a youth-led roundtable in Dallas later that summer. One where disagreement didn't mean destruction. One where listening wasn't weakness, but leadership. And that wasn't just a nice idea. It was a seed. Planted not in applause, but in stillness. Because what happened in that room didn't end on stage. It spread. It lingered. And quietly, it began to grow. By sunrise, something unusual had taken root. It wasn't just a trending clip or a string of hot takes. It was quieter than that, more intentional. Teachers were downloading the video to use in class. High school debate coaches were assigning it as required viewing. Parents were texting it to their kids with notes that simply said, "Watch this." And it wasn't about the clash. It was about the shift. Across Sunday morning political shows, the exchange was replayed again and again, but this time, not for outrage or mockery. The tone had changed. Anchor after anchor paused, just a moment longer than usual, to let Jasmine Crockett's words breathe. You don't walk into the ring expecting your last name to fight for you. That wasn't just a clever line. It was a mirror. Even commentators known for their fire paused to admit it wasn't a takedown. It was a masterclass in restraint. One former senator called it the most effective moment of generational accountability I've seen in a decade. Another pundit tweeted, "She didn't dominate him. She developed him." And Barron? He kept quiet. No follow-ups, no corrections, no interviews lined up. Just silence, and in that silence, respect grew. What struck people most wasn't just what Jasmine said, but how she said it. She didn't shame him. She didn't perform. She just told the truth. And that truth stuck, especially for those who'd been told all their lives to be smaller, to be softer, to say it nicer. For the ones who'd been told their pain was too loud, their presence too much. They saw something on that stage they rarely saw. Someone stand firm, without being cruel. Someone use experience not as a shield, but as a guide. And maybe the most powerful part? Barron listened. He didn't storm off. He didn't double down. He didn't smirk his way out. He sat in it. That was what landed. Because we live in a world where most people would rather go viral for being loud than grow quietly in front of an audience. But that night, one young man chose to sit with what he didn't know. And one woman chose to meet him there with clarity, not condemnation. And from that meeting came something rare. Understanding. No, it didn't change the country overnight. But it did something just as valuable. It reminded us of what's possible when someone shows up not to win, but to learn, and when someone else is strong enough not to humiliate, but to teach. In a world full of noise, this moment made room for something else. Growth. The headlines kept coming, but they missed the heart of it. They called it a clapback, a generational clash, a viral takedown. But none of those labels captured what actually happened inside that room. Because what Jasmine Crockett delivered that night wasn't a gotcha moment. It wasn't even about Barron Trump. It was bigger, more grounded, and way more rare. It was a blueprint for what conversations could look like if we stopped performing and started participating. She didn't come with insults. She didn't come to embarrass him. She came with receipt stories, names, systems, and memories she had carried into that room like armor. Not to protect herself, but to remind everyone listening that her passion didn't come from politics. It came from pain. And Barron? He received it. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, but honestly. And that made all the difference. You could feel it in the way his voice softened by the end, in the way he stopped reaching for applause and started reaching for understanding. There was no spin left in him, just someone realizing that maybe he had walked into the ring with the wrong gloves on. But instead of mocking him, Jasmine Crockett did something we rarely see anymore. She let the lesson land without bruising the student. And that's what stuck with people. It was the restraint, the wisdom, the discipline to stay grounded when she could have gone viral for swinging harder. Instead, she showed how strength can sit still, how truth, when delivered with clarity, instead of ego, doesn't need volume to carry weight. That moment, quiet, sharp, uncomfortable, didn't end with applause. It ended with a pause. The kind that makes you breathe slower. The kind that sits with you long after the screen fades to black. And that's what people kept talking about. Not who won, not who looked better, but how it felt to witness someone grow in real time. How rare it was to see someone admit, "I missed something," and mean it. For Barron, this wasn't a defeat. It was a beginning. For Jasmine, it wasn't a victory. It was a responsibility. And for the rest of us, it was a reminder that leadership isn't just about answers. It's about the questions you're willing to ask yourself when no one's clapping. That kind of moment doesn't come around often. But when it does, you don't forget it. Because it shows us what's possible when courage meets humility on both sides of the mic. It didn't end with fireworks. There was no standing ovation, no chants, no dramatic mic drop. The town hall in Grand Rapids ended the same way it began, quietly. A thank you from the moderator. A slow fade out. Chairs being folded. Lights dimming. People gathering their things. But the real shift? It was in the silence that followed. Because something had cracked open on that stage. And not just for Barron Trump or Jasmine Crockett. It opened something in all of us. Barron didn't walk out a hero, but he didn't walk out a punchline either. He walked out human. And that, maybe, was the most powerful part. He had walked in, prepared to deliver, to dominate, to earn a clip that could be played in rooms that already agreed with him. But instead, he got something messier. He got humbled. And instead of rejecting that, he leaned in. Not perfectly, not dramatically, but honestly. That's rare. We don't see that on camera much. Usually, when someone's called out, they double down, they yell louder, they blame editing, they storm off. But Barron didn't. He stayed. And Jasmine? She didn't twist the knife. She didn't weaponize the moment. She let the space breathe. She let the lesson settle. Because she knew something too many people forget. You don't need to humiliate someone to make your point. You just need to make it honestly. That's what leadership looks like when it grows past ego and into something deeper, into legacy. And in the days that followed, the ripples didn't fade. Clips from the exchange made their way into classrooms, community groups, book clubs, sermons. Not because they were loud, but because they were true. Because somewhere between Jasmine's calm and Barron's quiet, we saw something we didn't know we missed. Two polarized in different worlds, shaped by different truths meeting in a space neither one fully controlled, and choosing for just a moment not to win, but to listen. It didn't change the world overnight, but it changed something in that room. And in a world filled with shouting matches disguised as dialogue, that matters. Because maybe, just maybe, the real power isn't in delivering the final word, it's in leaving space for the next one. So the next time you find yourself at a microphone reel or metaphorical, ask yourself, are you here to speak, or are you ready to hear? And when someone offers you a truth that doesn't flatter your pride, can you sit in that moment long enough to grow? Barron Trump did. Jasmine Crockett showed him how. And the rest of us? We watched something rare. Not just a conversation. A turning point